attended online by our guest, as well as by members of our committee, in line with the procedure approved by the committee on the rules of the Chamber of Deputies of November 2020. Today, within the framework of the fact-finding investigation into Italy's commitment at international level for the promotion and safeguard of human rights and against discrimination, we will be having a hearing online of Polish activist Madam Kasia Wappa, who is committed to assisting and supporting migrants stranded at the border between Belarus and Poland. Also, on behalf of the members of our subcommittee, I wish to greet and thank our guest for accepting our invitation to this hearing. As you know, in summer 2021, Lukashenko's regime lured thousands of migrants by granting tourist visa and then pushed them, together with many asylum seekers coming from the Middle East, to the border with Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, with the deliberate intention to create a regional crisis and to destabilize the European Union. A key role was also played by Moscow, which is the main ally of Minsk. This is a new and cruel form of hybrid threat, the exploitation of innocent people with the cooperation of traffickers of human beings. Okay. And this hybrid threat is carried out by a state for political purposes, as underlined by High Representative Borrell and by the EU Commissioner for Internal Affairs, Madam Johansson. This is not a migration crisis, but a hybrid attack. The highest price is paid by people stranded at the border who are deprived of their fundamental rights and are living in the cold and in inhuman conditions. Over the last few months, the NGOs have reported the death of 21 people of migrants stranded at the border, among them also an infant. And all those dead people should touch the hearts of all of us. The European Union has imposed rigid economic sanctions on the country of Alexander Lukashenko, while he is threatening to stop natural gas supplies to the countries of the European Union. In response to the action of the dictator of Belarus, the Polish authorities sent thousands of troops to the border, and in last October, they amended the domestic legislation allowing the pushbacks of migrants who in most cases come from Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Afghanistan. So they are presumably asylum seekers eligible for international protection. I would like to quote a message which is broadcast in English. The Polish border is sealed. The authorities of Belarus lied to you. Go back to Minsk. This is a message, a text message in English sent by the Polish government to all the mobile phones registered abroad belonging to migrants getting to Poland's eastern border with Belarus. In this tragic situation, an undercover network of citizens living close to the border is self-organizing to help those desperate people stranded in the white forests of Bielorussia and to avoid those pushbacks. These volunteers operate in very complex and dangerous situations and conditions because humanitarian groups and media were forbidden to enter that zone. This is why the humanitarian aid at the border with Belarus is mostly provided by common Polish citizens like our guest. For example, the firefighters' barracks in the eastern country of Michelowa has become a point where donations for asylum seekers are collected. Food, clothing, nappies, medicines, and toys are collected here and then are distributed by firefighters to migrants met during their patrolling operations in the area. In a resolution adopted on 16 September 2021, the European Parliament condemned the attempt of Belarusian authorities to exploit migrants and asylum seekers as a hybrid threat against Poland and other member states. Urged the Polish authorities to ensure that EU legislation on asylum and returns, as well as international humanitarian law, are fully respected and implemented also during emergency situations, including access to asylum and access of media and civil society organizations to the border zone. Subsequently, in a resolution adopted on the 7th of October 2021, the European Parliament urged EU member states and institutions to assist migrants stranded at the border with Belarus, that is the border of the European Union with Belarus, and to provide them the necessary support, urging the European Commission to draft ad hoc legislation to react rapidly and effectively to exploitations carried out by non-EU countries. Member states and institutions of the European Union cannot accept violations of human rights carried out in Poland, that is, on the territory of the European Union, against innocent people. Also, the resolution on the protection of migrants adopted by the United Nations urges states to protect all migrants, irrespective of their status, in particular, the rights of women and children, and to address migration through cooperation and international dialogue, bilateral dialogue and regional dialogue, and with balanced approach, recognizing the role and responsibilities of the countries of origin, transit, and arrival, and based on practices complying with international humanitarian law. The Commissioner on Human Rights of the Council of Europe, Madam Dunja Mijatovic, was heard by our subcommittee in December of last year, and she said that all the interested countries, Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, those countries pushing back and denying access to fair asylum procedures to migrants and asylum seekers cannot be accepted by the Council of Europe, because they are members of the Council of Europe and they have to comply with international tools like the European Convention on Human Rights and the Convention on Refugees. And last 4th February, Commissioner Mijatovic published her written observations and submitted to the European Court of Human Rights. And she reported regular practice of pushing back migrants and asylum seekers in Belarus without any check on whether they are eligible for international protection. The Commissioner has also pointed out that the recent amendments to legislation in Poland undermine the possibilities for these people to have access to individual procedures and to ask for protection in Poland, while pushbacks expose migrants and asylum seekers to the risk of being tortured and mistreated in Belarus in violation of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. A further problem is restricted access to the border zone for people and organizations that could provide aid, support, or legal assistance. And this happens in violation of Articles 2 and 3 of that convention. I would also like to add that the Deputy Commissioner on Human Rights of Poland, Madam Maczynska, also regretted that this situation affects families, children, and pregnant women, and that these people are not informed on their eligibility for international protection. So Polish Deputy Commissioner expressed their reservations on Polish legislation, allowing for pushbacks. And she defined this as an inhuman system in violation of Polish constitution and the European and international law. Having said that, I would like to give the floor to Madam Kasia Wappa. Madam Wappa has a direct experience which has been achieved at the border, and she will tell us about the tragic situation at the border and in terms of human rights. So, Madam Wappa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for your invitation to our today's meeting. And it is a real honor to be able to talk to you today about the violations of the human rights during the crisis, the humanitarian crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border. As it has already been said, my name is Kasia Wappa, and I am a local resident of the borderline area, and more exactly of the Białowieża forest region, which is just next to the border with Belarus. I am also one of many activists working with Grupa Granica, a group of institutions and foundations helping refugees trapped in the wild on the Polish side of the border. As it has also been said today, and as you are all well aware of, the crisis is orchestrated by the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, who opened flight connections to Minsk through Middle East-based holiday tour operators, making false claims of easy entry to the European Union. Belarus acted as a large-scale smuggler that lured people to the border and then violently forced them to cross it, pushing them towards the razor wires dividing Belarus from the European Union. As a result, what has been going on at the Polish-Belarusian border is not a major migration crisis, because the number of migrants is not very big. It equals just a few thousand people. What is worse are the conditions that people are in, because what we see are situations and conditions like during the time of war. And people are fighting for lives, even though there is no war around them. Okay, but I would like to start with some quick legal and geographical facts. Some of them were mentioned today, I think, as well. So first of all, I want to say a few words about the very beginnings of the crisis, which happened on the 8th of August, 2021 in Usnarz Górny, when the first group of refugees from Afghanistan was reported to have crossed the border with Poland. Then they were pushed to the Belarusian side by Polish border guards. Later on, the group was pushed back and forth many times between Poland and Belarus, and they received no humanitarian aid. This is also more or less the time when Grupa Granica, a consortium of human rights and refugee-oriented organizations, was created in order to monitor the situation at the border, provide help, and educate people about migrations. On the 20th of August, Polish Minister of International Affairs and Administration issued an act legalizing expulsions, or in other words, pushbacks, According to this regulation, people who have crossed the Polish border illegally are to be taken back to the border, and no exceptions are foreseen, even to those who declare that they want to ask for protection under international law. On the 2nd of September 2021, a state of emergency was introduced in 183 towns and villages along the 418-kilometer long border with Belarus, and a state of emergency zone was created. I am going to call this zone the red zone because it will make the concept easier to convey and also to visualize its red markings layered on some maps that we use here as the activists. The zone means restrictions that involve the prohibition of entry to non-residents, ban on any recording by technical means of the features and places and objects of the borderline infrastructure. It also limits access to public information, which in practice means no journalists are allowed into the zone. What followed the introduction of the zone was also huge and very visible militarization of the area next to the border. Between 20 and 30,000 of soldiers arrived, supported by the police and border guards from all over Poland, as well as by the Territorial Defense Force, which is a special kind of army made up of part-time volunteer soldiers. On the 17th of September 2021, Polish Parliament passed an amendment to the law on foreigners, the so-called expulsion law, which is at odds with the international law and in fact makes pushbacks legal in Polish terms. It is also around that time that the first bodies of victims of the border were found. So far, we don't know exactly how many people died at the border on the Polish side, at least 13, maybe more, undoubtedly many more of them on the Belarusian side. Finally, a few words of introduction describing the terrain a little bit, because I think it is quite significant. The border area is mostly covered by woodlands and is not very densely settled. The Białowieża forest is in the very east of Poland, is famous for its wilderness, for its swamps, bisons, and other wild animals. It is one of the oldest national parks of our continent and a place difficult to cross. Something that can be compared to a kind of a sea with Belarus and Poland on its opposite shores. The forest is usually given the name of a jungle by the refugees, and in some cases, it turned out to be a deadly trap. Last but not least, there is also the river Bug, more to the south, one of the major Polish rivers that also claimed human lives during the crisis. With this basic background, I would like to move on to the situation of the refugees or migrants, as they are sometimes called, at the border with Poland. So the situation at the border started getting worse and worse in the second half of September 2021. By worse, I mean the quickly growing number of refugees in the forest, paired with deteriorating weather conditions. At the same time, the number of the military forces was growing. Soldiers, border guards, and the police started thorough controls of the area that aimed at catching and pushing the refugees back to Belarus. As a result, refugees found themselves trapped in the wild terrain of what they called the jungle, which also happened to be located in the red restricted zone, where no humanitarian or medical aid organizations or no media were allowed. In consequence, two things happened. First of all, the migrants were in danger of losing health and lives, hiding themselves, running away, starving like during some kind of a war. But in fact, there was no war, just the silence of the forest and the isolation of the zone. Secondly, because of this very isolation and restrictions, local residents had to get involved and become activists, which is exactly my case. What did we see and what can we report about the trials that refugees had to, and some of them still have to go through? This is what I am going to focus on right now. Let me start with the lack of basic life-sustaining supplies, such as food and water. It is a norm that the people we met in the forest had had no food for days. The number varied 3, 4, 6 days. Once I met a family with no food for more than a week. With the growing number of pushbacks, refugees ran out of food and of money to buy something to eat in some makeshift shops that exist along the border on the Belarusian side, and where, by the way, prices are strongly inflated. They take with them cans with fish or chicken bread spread. They have dried fruit like figs or dates, sometimes some bread. After many days in the forest, and the number, as I have said, can vary, they get more and more hungry. I was told by some migrants that they tried to find some edible things, plants in the forest. They tried eating some herbs, some grass, or some attractively looking berries like rowan berries, which of course are not edible. Another problem is the lack of drinking water, which all groups have to face. I met, for example, 2 groups, one from Yemen, another from Iraqi Kurdistan, that had had no water for 6 days. In such case, people try to drink water from the swamp, or some of the water that was collected after the rain in the tree leaves. But usually this is the swamp water. They collect it in plastic bottles and carry the brown, muddy liquid with them, trying to share it between the members of the group. Of course, this water cannot be drunk and leads to stomach problems. However, if you don't drink this kind of water, you might faint of dehydration. So this is a kind of a vicious circle. Soran, a university lecturer from Kurdistan, whom I met in November in the forest, told me how he was saving the swamp water for his wife, but he himself could hardly stand on his feet, just not to deprive his wife of the little water they had. He suffered from dehydration himself. Because of the dehydration, this common problem, we often witness many cases of kidney problems, especially nephritis. Myself, I once helped a Kurd called Sarhang, who suffered greatly from this disease and had to be telediagnosed by one of the doctors who could not enter the zone. In practice, the activist banged the man's back with her fist according to the doctor's tips given on the phone, which is a kind of a ridiculous situation, but simply it shows what we as activists are forced to do and the situation we are forced into. A famous case of severe problems with kidneys was a Syrian girl and also one of her lungs due to nephritis and pneumonia. After 2 months in coma in the hospital in Hainovka, somehow managed to get over her life-threatening condition and made it to Germany through the humanitarian corridor that was created for her thanks to some Polish and German efforts. Still, Marwa is going to have health problems and suffer from kidney problems till the end of her days. Yet another problem is the lack of proper clothes, boots, most frequently also staying in wet outfits for days. As already said, the forest is a very wet, swampy place, where it often rains in autumn and then sleets and snows in winter. A place which, even without rain, is still very humid and makes clothes and sleeping bags simply soak through. Additionally, the swamps sometimes suck some shoes in or make the feet very wet. Finally, some refugees decide to walk along rivers as their guidelines or find themselves trapped in the strict reserve of the Białowieża National Park, which is totally surrounded by rivers that have to be crossed by just wading through them. We met families in which the parents carried their little children over their heads when they themselves got into the river to get to its another bank. We encountered people who walked barefoot across the swamp in October for 4 days, like, for example, a 20-year-old boy from Iraq called Ali. Some groups from Yemen, Cameroon, and Syria that I met had no shoes at all, even though it was frosty at night. We met people from Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Egypt, also from other countries whose shoes were completely wet and sometimes falling apart. Because of keeping their feet in the damp for many days, most of the people had problems with feet, like when you stay in a bath for too long, let's say for half a week, and your skin gets crumpled, starts forming blisters, falling off and creating painful wounds. Moreover, wet clothes accelerate hypothermia, which is another common case and started happening here, started being reported as early as in October. On October 23rd, a group of 5 Syrians in hypothermia was found near Hajnówka, at least one of them in the deepest stage of hypothermia. And yes, the people were taken to hospital first, but the very next day, they were pushed back to Belarus. This is just one of the examples. Another well-described case of hypothermia combined with lack of proper medical care is the case of a 30-year-old Kurdish woman, Avin Ifran. Avin was a mother of 5 and pregnant with her 6th baby. After many pushbacks and many days in the cold, she lost her child, but still carried the unborn child in her womb for many more days. When she was found by the activists, her body temperature was nearly 28 degrees. She was taken to hospital, but sepsis, problems with kidneys, and hypothermia took her away just a few days later. Her husband, Baravan, with the 5 children, finally ended up in one of the open refugee centers in the nearby city of Białystok. 2 weeks ago, we had one of many examples of frostbites when a young footballer from Ghana suffered from the frostbite, and his toes were to be amputated, all of his toes. Somehow, thanks to the efforts of one of the activists, he got accepted for a treatment in some specialized clinic somewhere else in Poland. And we keep our fingers crossed for him that his toes are not amputated. All these situations also happen because the people that end up in the forest have no shelter at all, and they have to remain in the open space. Lack of medical help in the zone has been one of the biggest problems. A group of medics got together, gathered equipment, and started working at the border in October. But despite the request for permission to enter the zone, they were always refused. In consequence, these were very often activists themselves that had to diagnose the problem first and provide immediate necessary help. Sometimes regular ambulances were called, but it happened that hospitals did not want to send them, saying that either the road was too tough or that the patient was a refugee and would not be helped. In one of such cases, my friends from the borderline, Białowieża, had to carry a dying woman from a swamp in the stretcher made of a hammock, and the woman's 14-year-old daughter that was too weak to walk had to be carried in the arms of a friend of mine. When providing this kind of help, of course, the activists do not have a nice and easy walk. They have to hide. They have to avoid any possible patrols of the police or border guards. And I want to add here that if a refugee is taken to hospital, to a public hospital, they still risk being pushed back right on or even before their full recovery. All the already mentioned problems have been taking place along with pushbacks: hunger, thirst, cold, hypothermia, illnesses, terror, violence spurred with multiple pushbacks. Out of maybe about 120 people that myself met and helped in 2021 in the forest, there were only a few cases of migrants that managed to avoid a pushback. I would say that less than 10. The prevailing rest of the refugees were pushed back to the Belarusian territory a different number of times. I met people who experienced even 15 pushbacks, and with each one of them, they were physically weaker, more desperate, and depressed. In the report published at the end of November 2021 by Grupa Granica, the number of at least 27,500 recorded pushbacks is given. Since then, the number has certainly increased a lot. When chased by the military services and during pushbacks, many groups and families were separated and are separated. For example, I met a family from Syria that suffered numerous expulsions to the Belarusian side and whose one member, beaten by the police dog on his head, was taken to hospital in Hajnówka. The family lost touch and knew nothing of each other's dreams. Sometimes children were lost in the forest, walking on their own before they were found, or children and parents were separated because some of them were taken to hospital. What is more, the refugees very often suffered from inhuman, treatment, starting with the Belarusian side, where they were beaten, kicked on their abdomen or even faces, hit on the legs and feet. Some extreme situations involved the usage of stun guns, of violence that led to broken ribs and other broken bones. In some cases, even cigarettes were extinguished on refugees' arms. On the Polish side of the border, this was mostly verbal abuse, force, ridiculing, pushing, damages of refugees' property. For example, border guards would frequently damage or totally destroy refugees' mobile phones, which are very important during their journey, as of course the phones are a means of contact with the family, and also the refugees, they use Google Maps to move on. Finally, those refugees that were taken to detention centers found themselves in prison-like conditions where they have about 2 square meters per person, no psychological support, even for children who lost their parents, and only very basic and hardly accessible medical care. They get no warm clothes or boots. There are no facilities or toys and drawing materials for children. Contact with attorneys is often made very difficult. Whatever is needed is provided by volunteers who organize donations and collect the necessary stuff that later has to be delivered to a particular detention center. Significantly, refugees are directed to long-term stays in closed detention centers, even if they have serious health problems like autoimmune diseases, which is the case of a family from Iran, for example, that I'm acquainted with. Or even when they are offered accommodation and working opportunities by some Polish citizens. Finally, there were quite a few suicidal attempts in the refugee centers. The most famous case is the place in Węgrzyn, near the border with Germany, where men are kept in unthinkable conditions. Those who survived the suicidal attempt are additionally punished for what they were trying to do. Even controls from different Polish monitoring institutions do not bring about any changes in the refugee centers, and Polish government does nothing to improve the situation. There is also another significant aspect of the crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border that I want to talk about now, namely the situation of the local residents who live in the zone or at its vicinity. Since the 2nd of September 2021, we have been living under the restrictions introduced by Polish government, even though these restrictions were found unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of Poland. The final sentence was adjudicated on the 18th of January 2022. The residents have to face the reality of living, working, bringing up children in a militarized area full of military vehicles of all kinds of trucks, Rosomak fighting vehicles with machine guns at the top, helicopters patrolling the area, all other possible things. We live in the area where freedom of mobility is strictly limited. Nobody from the outside the zone is allowed to enter. There were cases when even family members with addresses registered in other regions of Poland could not visit their parents registered in the zone. Additionally, to get into the zone, you have to go through controls at checkpoints. Sometimes the controls get very detailed. You are asked to show your ID, to give your parents' names, to say where, why, and for how long you are going. Your trunk is checked. It happens to a friend of mine that spare jackets of her children at the back of her car made the military men suspicious, and her car was later followed and finally stopped for further control. Our friends and volunteers, when walking at the edge of the forest, were suddenly stopped by soldiers, violently pulled to the ground, had guns pointed at them, and backpacks emptied. Sometimes unmarked cars stop us even outside the zone. They either drive from side roads or stop in the middle of a road and do not let you pass. I was once followed by a car at night that drove about 4 meters behind me for the distance of about 2 kilometers. Whenever I slowed down, the car slowed down. When I accelerated or even stopped, The car behind me did the same until it left. In January, me and my friends were stopped in a small village, and 4 soldiers with long guns rushed towards us with their rifles in hands, ready to be pointed at us. The situations that I'm talking about are some of the situations me and my friends experienced, but they can be multiplied by the number of activists and volunteers working at the border and living at the border. All the situations of control and patrols that I'm talking about, or almost all of them, took place after the sunset in the dark, when, according to the law, controls by unmarked vehicles and officers in plain clothes should not happen at all. It also happened a few times that soldiers would trespass private properties in the area, looking for refugees around the place, or peeking through the windows into the houses, also in search of some refugees that might possibly find shelter inside the houses. Finally, one of the sources of income in our region is nature tourism. In the most popular place, the village of Bielorussia, income of about 50% of residents depends strictly on tourists. Now, with the zone and unobvious future, many families found themselves in a very difficult economic situation, and their interests are disregarded by the government, which makes no declarations about the future regulations at the border, and has recently started erecting the fence at the border that is going to separate the Polish and Belarusian parts of the Bielorussia forest, the forest which is protected as a trans-border unity and UNESCO World Heritage Site. This in turn might lead to extinction of some iconic animal species and to further decline in tourist industry. Last but not least, I want to say that people like me became activists because we had no other choice, because there was nobody else to do that job. No humanitarian aid organizations were allowed to enter the zone, while we, the locals, could witness the humanitarian crisis growing each day. We found ourselves in a situation when we had to choose between carrying a suffering person from the swamp in our own arms or staying at home and letting the person die. We understood that because of the humanity that we value and share, we just had to act. So in fact, it had already been decided for us, but our help has been criminalized, our values and beliefs undermined. We sometimes face hostility, are attacked in social media, and by the right-wing controlled public media. Me, myself, was a victim of huge hate orchestrated by some extreme right news services, the hate that reached about 2 million people in Poland. And I was ridiculed, called the spy of Lukashenko, a traitor of the country who acts against the Polish uniform. To finish with, I want to say that right now it is rather quiet at the border. We focus on helping the refugees in detention centers and in hospitals. Still, we are aware that with the arrival of warmer days, the movement at the border will probably start once again. We strongly feel that this time we should not be left alone in the difficult situation that is not only a local, but a European issue. And when grassroots voices are disregarded by our Polish government, we, the grassroots movement's participants, put much trust and hope in the voice coming from other European countries and helping us and the refugees to be heard. We do not want Europe, which is just a promising slogan. We rely on Europe that proves in action that she is much more than big words of freedom, equality, and solidarity. That is also why, at the end of my speech, I want to thank you once again for inviting me today and giving me the possibility of talking to you about the situation during the crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border. Thank you very much.
Sì,
I would like to warmly thank you, Madam Wappa, not only for your detailed and exhaustive contribution, but also for the huge commitment to help, to assistance on the part of yourself and other people. You, as you said, were not born as an activist. You made a choice between humanity and inhumanity. So I would like to thank you because you opted for humanity and you are upholding the European values which are shared by so many of us in Europe and which are too often disregarded. I would like to ask my colleagues to ask the questions. Mr. Napoli, Mike. Thank you, first of all, for your valuable contribution. You spoke about migration from Afghanistan. Are there migrants still coming from Afghanistan? So first question. Second, how many refugees have been counted in the forest and how many cases of death, unfortunately, were registered in those dire conditions in the forest? And you mentioned the law on expulsion adopted by the Polish parliament. Was it adopted with an unanimous vote or was there any kind of opposition from any political party? So it would be interesting to know who decided, who made this choice in the parliament. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Napoli. Is there anyone else? Okay. Yes. Madam M. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to join my colleagues in thanking you for your detailed presentation and for the humanitarian action and aid that you've been providing together with your friends. First, a few remarks. In our subcommittee, we deal with human rights. And I regret that there is so much hypocritical approaches. Migrants and human rights are so much talked about, but then in terms of deeds, very few countries are effective in their action. Non-discrimination, respect for human rights, these are the values that should be implemented. Also in relation to Europe, at European level, in European institutions, we have so much consensus, but then in many countries, actions are quite the opposite. One more remark. Migrants and refugees. This is also a question which is approached with hypocritical attitudes. You spoke about people coming from Afghanistan, from Yemen, and from countries from where economic migrants are coming. I would not make any distinction between, so in this case, no distinction has to be made. We are talking in this case about human beings who decided to leave the countries of origin in search for a better life. So two questions. First, which is the approach, the feeling of the Polish civil society. You're an activist, but I would like to know something about the Polish public opinion in relation to these matters. And then I would like to join my colleague, Mr. Napoli, in asking you on decisions, or what kind of decisions are made and are voted upon by the majority in Parliament. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleague M. I don't know whether our colleagues connected online would like to take the floor. I would take this opportunity to make some final remarks. Your actions is of crucial importance to save human lives and to help people. I would like to better understand what are the risks for an activist like you today if you are found, are caught, let's say, by authorities. Would the legislation on expulsions provide for sanctions or punishment for people helping migrants and asylum seekers? I imagine that quite soon infringement procedures would be started by relevant EU institutions because the Geneva Convention has to be ratified, and non-refoulements are a precondition for complying with international and also European standards. So what I would like to understand is whether the Polish government, which introduced this legislative measure, also provided for some sanctions against people helping migrants. For example, in Hungary, measures were adopted against those helping irregular migrants, the so-called crime of solidarity. I was just wondering whether in Poland you did the same or the Polish authorities did the same. So, Madam Wappa, you have the floor.
I have to say that I did not have all the questions translated into English. So I will, but I understood some of them, and please facilitate me with some of the answers, okay? So I think that the, am I heard? Am I heard?
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can, but I did not have all the questions translated into English.
Yeah, but just a sec. Let me try to see if now it's possible to translate. Just hold a sec. Possiamo fare la traduzione ora? Come si fa? Well, no, infatti. Apparently, you haven't chosen the right channel for the translation. Can you just select the right channel?
I chose English. I did it before the meeting.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I am.
Can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me on the English channel? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, can you hear me?
I will start with the questions that I understood.
Allora parto.
Please forgive me the inconveniences and help me with the remaining ones again, okay? I think that the first question was about the number of the refugees in the forest, right? It is difficult to give the exact number. We can, because of course, many of the crossings were not registered. We can estimate the number of the refugees based on a few facts. First of all, in the last part of the 2021, Grupa Granica, so this helping institution, helping consortium, received more than 5,000 calls for help. And of course, some of the calls for help might have been repeated. A family could ask twice, for example. This is one thing. And the other thing is that a group might be formed of a different number of participants. But we could say that if just a few thousand people, less than 5,000, this is one of the numbers that we can we can report from Poland. And then we had information about a few thousand illegal crossings of the Polish-German border. To sum up and put together all these facts, we should think that a few thousand people altogether were present and at the Polish-Belarusian border. The number probably bigger than 5,000, but this is really difficult and probably impossible to make an accurate estimation. The number of the lethal victims of the border is another difficult thing to say, because there were bodies found and at least 13 of them were reported in the public media in Poland. Usually the fact of people dying at the border was silenced by the main TV channels that are under the control of the government. And basically, these were mostly the opposition channels and opposition newspapers that reported in detail about these situations. But of course, we are aware of the fact that the area at the border is a very difficult one, and some of the places are really inaccessible. And we fear that in spring, more bodies can be found. And of course, we know nothing about the situation on the Belarusian side, where all the problem is silenced. And the only information that is given is the information that President Lukashenko wants to voice. So all in all, we suppose that there are many more victims than the reported 13 or 14 on the Polish side. And I think that there was also a question about the reaction of Polish politicians. Am I right? To the problem. I have to say that, no?
No, I think the question was regarding the Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Parlo in italiano o in inglese? Faccio in inglese, no problem. I can do in English. I had two questions regarding, firstly, the first question was regarding the civil society sentiment. So whatever is their opinion regarding this situation, regarding this problem. And on the second hand, of course, also the parliamentary part. So what is the opinion and what are decisions taken by the parliament? And is there, in any case, a majority or a minority which is for or against this decision regarding this problem?
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, in addition to this, regarding the refoulement, we also would like to know if that was a decree, an emergency decree, or a parliamentary law, and if was a parliamentary law, which parties approved that law and which party, didn't vote in favor of the law. Thank you.
Okay, good. So let's start with the civil society. Of course, as you well know from Italy, the issue of migration, the issue of refugees is a hot issue and it divides the society a lot. And in Poland, I would say that the division line could be something like 50-50% of people being for or against in the most optimistic version. I would also say that it depends on the region of Poland and on the voters, because basically mostly the people that support law and justice are against, and of course the right-wing parties are against refugees. But I would say that it's not this black and white situation. There are also voters of more left-wing groups that also are against the refugees. I would also say that in the east of Poland, where we have been witnessing the crisis with our own eyes, the number might be more optimistic in regards of allowing the refugees in, because we've seen them suffering so much. So we do know from our own experience that the situation they are in is inhuman. Another thing worth emphasizing here is that the big part of the society that still supports letting the refugees in, because the number is not really big. We would not even feel a few thousand refugees spreading around the country as big as Poland, a country of 38 million. So the people that want to help and are far away from the border created a very strong civil society that has become something like an underground country where we get support, either financial or support in supplies, whatever we might need from all over. It's a very, very strong movement. This is very encouraging on the one hand. I also went about it deep. It's a little bit depressing that all of this help has to be organized by the citizens without any support of the government, without any support of the country that we pay our for. About the parliament and how it looks like in the parliament. Because our parliament in majority is constituted by law and justice and connected parties. Of course, the idea that all the anti-refugee opinions and policies find big support in the government. That's why all the amendments, pushback acts, that they were passed on by the parliament in overnight meetings. They did it very quickly, without many opposing voices. And of course, that oppose the ideas of the restriction zone, of pushbacks, usually belong to left-wing parties like Partia Razem and the leftist parties. Mm-hmm. But they are in the minority. That's why they cannot change much.
Ok. Abbiamo altre domande? Sì, abbiamo la collega.
Are there any questions? Quartapelle online.
Grazie per questa audizione. Volevo capire
I would like, so first, thanks to Madam Wappa. So, in your opinion, how can we act together with our Italian civil society to support your work?
Thank you very much for this question. Again, I did not get the English translation. I'm sorry, I don't know what does not work here. But if I understood it right, you asked me about the way of supporting the people helping her, yes? Here, yes?
If we can in any way increase the support to what you're doing, also through through Italian civil society.
Yeah. Thank you very much. In fact, we got quite a big response from different organizations in Italy that came to help at the border. They offered us donations. They brought us some shoes and warm clothes. It was in November, I believe, that they came here. And Italian activists were ready to share their experience with us. They also helped in the forest for a while, which was very meaningful because we are still learning how to provide humanitarian aid from people that have been doing it for years on the Balkan route. And how to increase help. At the very moment, we are in a standby mode. So we are just waiting. I would say that what matters now is that the topic does not die down, that we are not forgotten elsewhere in Europe, that either organizations or journalists that spread the news are ready to come and talk about the problem and support us once it probably restarts in spring. And then probably our needs will be published on the internet and probably will be delivered through our private channels connecting different institutions and organizations. So I would say that for the time being, let's wait and then we will say what we need.
Yeah, I have also another question regarding the response of the common people, common citizens, the so-called Green Lanterns. They were quite known all over, but are they still there? Are they still alive as a movement? And are refugees still in the forest or the movement is over for the time being?
Yes, this is a good question because the Green Lantern movement was quite special, especially at the beginning, because with the criminalization of our help, it was like a shout out that here I am and I am ready to support the refugees. How did it work in practice? It was a little bit complicated because it turned out that some of the houses with green lights on were more frequently patrolled or passed by border guards or by the police, which made helping there a little bit more difficult. At some point, I would say that the Green Lanterns played a big and important role as a way of educating people about openness and about the legal aspect of helping when, according to the Polish right, whenever we meet a person that is in danger of losing life and we do not risk our own life and our own health, we are obliged to provide help. Otherwise, we commit a crime. Anyway, I do know from my friends that live in villages to the zone, because me myself, I live in a town. It's more difficult for refugees to get outside a town. But some of the Green did attract some refugees shore, and it happened to some friends that they, for example, knocking at their door to ask for help. Some neighbors of these houses with green light have some doubts about this procedure. Sometimes they voiced some doubts, some hostility towards the people that put the lights on. But it was possible to talk about that, and there were no acts of vandalism, no acts of open hostility towards the Green Light Initiative. Yes, so this is it. Was there anything else that I forgot to talk about? Yeah, maybe yeah.
Yeah, would you please tell us what is the risk that an activist is facing helping migrants, irregular migrants? I mean, if police block you when you are in the act to assist somebody, or you give hospitality to an irregular migrant at home, what are the consequences, legally speaking?
Of course, there are different levels of punishment, I would say, starting with verbal kind of advice, what to do, what not to do. This is very light, and we do not fear that. Another level is a fine, a ticket that you pay. This is about 500 zlotys. I would say something like 120 euro or something. In Poland, this is not a huge amount of money, but something that you do feel when you have to pay it. And then if you are caught red-handed when helping refugees, of course, you might be arrested for some time just to give you the idea that what you are doing is not something really much liked by the country, something that is not promoted by the country. And of course, the refugees would be taken away to the border guard headquarters, from where they would be probably pushed back. That is also why when providing help, we do pay huge attention to not being noticed. This is not only because of the fear that we don't want to get arrested, but first of all, this is the fear for the migrants that even though they are in a very, very weak health, very weak condition, they will be pushed back once they are found. And of course, the higher level of punishments are legal processes, legal trials, and they might end up in a few years in prison. I don't remember exactly if it is 6 years, 7 or 8, but something within this period of time, because the accusation that can be given against you is the accusation that you are facilitating illegal crossing of the border. And now here is the interpretation of the legal regulation, what exactly does this facilitating mean? Because we do not lead the people across the border. They have already crossed it by themselves. Simply, we are there finding them in the wilderness and helping them. But of course, connected with this question of what facilitating help means, there is this issue of what more can we do apart from providing food and leaving the people behind in the forest? Because with the frost of -15 at night, like we had it in December or January, for example, the most obvious solution would be to take the people out from the forest and give them some shelter. Now, if there are no shelters organized by the country, the shelter that can be provided or could be provided is a house of a private person, of an individual. But then what's the risk? Because we would have to put the person in the car. This might be seen as facilitating illegal crossings. We cannot prove where we started the journey or where we are going to finish the journey. And then if we take the person home, what would happen if there would be, I don't know, a policeman knocking at your door and seeing the illegal person at your house? Even though I have to admit that we did take some people home, because without this step, they would have lost our lives. And me, myself, I had a man in my house. We had to carry him from the side of one of the main roads just outside Hajnówka, where I live. And we had to carry him into my house. He was unconscious. We had to phone the doctors. The doctors would come to my house. They diagnosed him with hypothermia, dehydration, and starvation. And he just needed 5 days in bed to get over this weakness and start walking again. Without our help, he would have been one more nameless victim of the border because he had his phone and all his documents stolen from him on the Belarusian side. So this is what we have to do. And this is something that, in fact, we do not talk about to the media in Poland. We do not talk about it in public usually because we fear some kind of penalties.
Sì, non so se la traduzione funziona, se possiamo... can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
You don't hear the translation yet.
Can you hear the translation? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. English channel. Okay.
Hearing. I really would like to thank you for having given us such a picture, which is tremendously critical, but we really appreciate your efforts and the efforts of the activists, the Polish activists, that despite all the risk, they continue to save human lives. So we really wish you all the best. And from our side, we will see how we can support your activities, because I think your activities is noble, and you know, and I think also that being part of the EU family also means to respect, you know, fundamental human rights, which are at the basis of our being a community. So you are doing this on our behalf, and we are grateful to you for doing so. Thank you very much. We wish you all the best, Madam Wappa. Ciao.
Thank you very much. I wish you all the best as well.
Thank you.